All right, we are ready for our new Zoom interview sessions as part of the A New Tomorrow initiative with European Cities Marketing. I'm Zine of Group NAO, and I have the immense pleasure of today talking to Roy Graff, the Managing Director EMEA of Dragon Trail. And Roy has over 20 years of experience working in China with tourism, hospitality, retail, and the digital marketing sectors. So I invited Roy to join us today because in the webinars we've hosted, we had quite a few questions about China coming up and what's happening in China, what to expect from China. And well, Roy is kind of my go-to guy for questions like that. And so that's why I'm really happy that you had the time to join us today, Roy. I also got a lot of questions from European Cities Marketing. They have these knowledge groups, and all the members of the knowledge group sent questions. So we're going to go through some of them today as well. So yeah, thank you for being here. And so just to get us started off, I wanted to ask you, like, what's the current status in China? From the media, we hear they're opening up, starting to look at boosting domestic tourism, but what is really happening, and what kind of precautions are they taking at the moment?
Sure. So it's really great to be here with you. I think we last met at a Pata event, right? But also
Yeah.
I spoke at the European Cities Marketing Conference. Where was it?
Yeah, when was that? That's a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah, last year. But
Yeah.
now everything is online, so this is great. We are, as some people may know, but not everybody maybe knows who Dragon Trail is. We're a Chinese digital marketing agency that focuses exclusively on tourism and hospitality. And that gives us a unique insight into what's happening with Chinese travelers as well as the Chinese travel trade. We've been doing this now for 11 years. I joined the company more than 3 years ago to open their London office and to look after Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We regularly monitor the activities of destinations, both national tourism boards and cities and regional tourism boards, hotel chains, cruise lines, airlines, attractions. We monitor their social media activities and their performance to get a feel of what's happening in the market. We also regularly survey both the travel agents in China and consumers. Now, the first quarter of 2020 was obviously very, very problematic. And with China being the first place that got hit by the coronavirus crisis, we saw immediately a total shutdown of travel across China, both outbound and domestic. Now, China is also the first country to emerge out of the crisis and basically have it under control. So since basically the middle of April, there have been gradual opening up of the economy. With at this present time, there is basically it's allowed to travel between cities and between provinces for independent people. So if you're traveling alone or with some friends, that's fine. There's still a ban on group and package travel. And there are some provinces, specifically Beijing in the north area, that is still under some restrictions. So for example, if you live in Beijing or around that area, if you travel out of the province and you come back, you'll need to go into quarantine, even if you don't have any symptoms. But other provinces are already open for domestic travel. And already about 70% of hotels, maybe even more, are open for business around China. And the first opportunity we've seen for tourism was in April, the Tomb Sweeping Festivals, Qingmingjie. But there was a significant drop of travel compared to last year because people are understandably still afraid, and there's government officials, school children, teachers have been asked not to travel.
Okay. Right. So sorry. Yeah. So, but then would you say, because I think it's interesting that you say like 70% of the hotels are now open for business. Is there anything showing like how hard is the industry hit in China? Like how many hotels have had to close down basically due to the crisis? Are there any statistics out on something like that? No?
So we've had, as I mentioned, for the Tomb Sweeping holiday, which was at the beginning of April, there was a 60% decrease compared to the previous year.
Mhm.
In terms of hotels, so hotels were generally actually close to 86% of hotels in major cities were open for business. And in some cities, it's up to 90%. But the occupancy rate at the end of March was 31.8%. But in February, it was about 7.4%.
Okay.
So hotels, I mean, many hotels were still open, but just not taking any customers. And there were a lot of hotels that stayed open, but specifically to offer accommodation for health workers and key workers that were sent from different provinces to help out, especially in Wuhan and hardly affected the areas.
Yeah.
So there's not so much specific statistics on exactly how many hotels were open or closed because, you know, the crisis period was a bit of a mess. But what we do know is that all the hotels were basically ready to open as soon as they could. And they already, I mean, in China, they already have experience with, say, testing people's temperatures on arrival, monitoring for symptoms, and reporting when somebody is showing symptoms or, you know, is sick in their hotel.
Yeah, they've had that from the past as well.
But they had it from SARS in 2003 and other diseases since then, other epidemics. So they have machines that can basically check temperatures as people walk in and out without having to stop or slow down. And now they've implemented further measures across not just hotel, but office buildings and residential buildings.
Right.
That include temperature checks and also using barcode scanners to check people's status. There is an app that was developed by WeChat that allows you to show a green color kind of code if you are showing no symptoms, but it also will alert you if you're in a risk group or if they can trace one of your contacts, somebody you've been in touch with who has developed symptoms, who is sick.
Then it changes color if it's it has tracked that you've been in contact with someone. Okay.
Yes.
Makes
And
sense.
a lot of places will, you know, so basically lots of restaurants and hotels and office buildings only allow people who have green in their app. And
going to that a little bit, because I think that's interesting, and it's also interesting that, of course, in China they've actually been somewhat used to, at a different level, of course, but to having their fevers checked or their temperature checked, and since the SARS. So I think in Europe that we're not used to that. We haven't really had that a lot. So just by, you know, introducing measures like that here, we'd be reminded of like the danger or the threat of the virus. But how do you see that fear like playing out in China? And like, is it affecting the demand? You said some are staying home right now. How do you see the future demand of travel, and how will fear be a part of that?
Well, so there are, we have some user sentiment surveys done recently that show a little bit about what people think when they plan to travel, if they are allowed to. But I would say and I can share some of that in a second. But in general terms, you know, people in China have been used, for example, to wear face masks. They do that whenever they're sick with anything. If they have the flu or cold, they wear a face mask to not infect other people. That's very normal. Also, people wear face masks for pollution. So people walking around now with face masks is the new norm. And while everybody's going to the office in China now, they're wearing face masks in the office. When it comes to what they're afraid of, obviously the fear is around catching it, mainly not necessarily because of the disease itself, but because it will basically mean that when they come back, they would have to quarantine. And that takes them out of circulation. They won't be able to work, etc. But this leaves, I think, opportunities as well. As and when countries start opening and accepting international tourists, I think that you will see that people will tend to prefer destinations that have in place very strict measures to track people's temperatures, to trace people who are sick, and that have very good healthcare systems in case something goes wrong. You know, travel insurance, while it was growing in popularity in China, but it's by no means something that is as widespread as in the West. But this experience, I think, is going to boost the sales of travel insurance across all of China.
I think it's really interesting though, that to say that that will be, you know, a key is that you'll travel to places where you know that they have a really good healthcare system and they have strict measures on hygiene and sanity. So do you see that becoming part of the branding of destinations moving forward?
I think it should be. Obviously, it needs to be done tactfully. If you focus too much on that, it also risks um, looking like you're worried about something that would happen, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
there are other considerations, and we've seen from the survey of, for example, which popular destinations you'd want to travel to in the next year. That's changing from previously was for America was #1 on the kind of aspiration list. Now it's not even in the top 10.
Right. Okay.
Partly is the fact that the pandemic is still very active in the US, and I think partly it's political and what the media portrays as kind of anti-Chinese sentiment in the US media and among politicians. So that is affecting that. But
Right.
beyond it, we see that countries like Switzerland, France, Iceland, places that have less population and more nature are more attractive now, more popular as places that people want to go to. Not so much the top attractions, but more places that don't have as many people and have more nature attractions.
Right.
And that is definitely a shift in where Chinese, used to prefer to travel.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's the non-crowded areas basically. Do you think it will be less cities then, or is it just cities in a different way?
So I think that cities are still a launch point for a lot of people, but maybe not the really big cities. So smaller cities can win when there's less crowding and more opportunity to have social distancing. And they're also closer and more accessible to nature. So for example, if you're in a major metropolis like Paris or London, it'll take you an hour plus to get out to see some nature beyond the kind of city parks. But if you're in a smaller city, whether it's Zurich or Geneva or something, then you're right next to nature, right? So I think that's also one reason why Switzerland is very popular. There's also again, things like developing countries that have very good healthcare systems, I think, are featuring as part of that. So the focus of the marketing messaging, I think, should definitely point out the measures they have in place, but also really boost the exposure to beautiful nature, places that are relatively empty. And that's actually a really interesting, significant cultural shift because culturally, Chinese don't like totally empty places. They feel unease, right? I mean, they're used to growing up with a lot of people around them. They often, there's a Chinese phrase called "kan now."
Yeah. Yes.
And it's about like going where it's popular, like seeing lots of crowds and like joining in because that means something is interesting is happening. And that is changing because it now is deemed to be risky.
Yeah, so but I think I've been thinking the same thing, that there's this cultural thing about being surrounded by people, and that makes it if it's noisy and a little bit active or lively, then it's good. But then, so how do you think that will actually influence the way that you travel? So of course we've seen a development from group tours to more individual tourism, but that was mainly part of like increased travel experience, and I guess also better and better individual finances and so on. But how do you think this will change in terms of even within smaller groups? Is it more family? Do you have like more closed entities, or what do you expect?
Well, there's a few dynamics at play here. I mean, there's already been a shift towards more FIT independent travel and a slower growth of group travel. But there are still a lot of places in China that are emerging as tourist markets where they start off with group travel, so second and third tier cities. I do think that this will accelerate the trend towards more independent travel in smaller groups, so self-organized or there's a FIT for full independent travels and SIT for semi-independent travelers. So they get together as self-organized groups, but they do book things themselves, and maybe some parts of it they'll book from travel agents.
Right.
But the other interesting thing is that we may see older people not traveling as much. The silver dollar was quite important, and a lot of people in China, when they retire, they are still quite healthy. They only had one child, so they are basically have relatively good disposable income, and they were traveling a lot. And I think now there is a risk because this virus targets older people, that
Yeah.
families will actually not go with the grandparents. So the groups will be smaller, and it'll be parents and children, and even some children, they might choose to leave the children at home, again, because of the perceived risk. And that would mean, on one hand, maybe smaller groups are more independent and couple travel. On the other hand, possibly they'll have money to spend on better quality of hotels and services.
Right. So then also tapping into the business tourism segment, what are your expectations there? Because I think a lot of destinations have also been focusing a lot on the MICE segment, on attracting business delegations and meetings. What do you see happening there?
In the short term, I think that a lot of companies are going to really cut down on the budget for business travel and conferences and exhibitions, as well as official travel. Again, because a lot of companies have lost a lot of money and work time. So, and because technology has shown that, that you can do a lot more stuff online. Our own experience as a digital agency is that, for example, in the travel trade kind of exhibition space and conference space, you can do a lot of it online. I mean, we developed our own tools that we've been working with quite a few clients to have totally online kind of exhibitions and one-to-one meetings and webinars and things like that. All that is taking away some of it, but it doesn't totally replace the face-to-face meetings and building relationships. That's still very important, but I think it will have to be justified to a greater extent, and supported by more online communication.
More exclusive then also, in a way, like maybe not for the first meeting, but then for more like diving into networking and relations, do you think?
Yeah, I think that organizers of events will have to really show the value much more. It's no longer about like, come have some fun and get drunk together, or like, kind of networking that way. I think they will have to show real value for their events. So maybe it'll push the events to be of higher quality, more exclusive, but and delivering more value.
Right. Okay, and then of course there's the $1 million question of what's the perspective of this? What are we talking about? So now we're talking about what will happen when they start traveling, but then the question is, when do you think they will start to travel again?
I can answer from the perspective of what we see the agents are thinking about, what consumers are saying, when they will feel comfortable traveling again. That doesn't mean it will happen, because it depends where they can travel. Now, because the Chinese economy have been hit so hard, and because so many countries are just in the middle, or even some are in the beginning of this pandemic, domestic tourism will recover and is already starting that recovery. As I mentioned before, kind of occupancy rates are now close to like 50%, and they're getting better at hotels domestically. Attractions are very busy, but also a lot of attractions in China are limiting the capacity to maintain social distancing. So they're limiting it to over like 30% of their full capacity. People have to book time slots online, which wasn't the case before. So again, it'll be a slower recovery because of that, but it will be the first to recover. When they will start traveling internationally, the respondents for surveys say that October, the National Day holiday in October, which is 10 days from the 1st of October, is when they really intend to, by and large, travel internationally. And as a second option, I think that was about 60+%, and then about 40% said that they will travel during the summer holidays. But
summer holidays 21.
20, no,
this
20,
year.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The top destination that they're thinking of going to is Thailand right now. I do think that when people start traveling, it'll first be Southeast Asia, partly because, again, I mean, they would have less money this year than disposable income. And they may have been using their savings to live on when they didn't have work. So cheaper destinations like Thailand are going to be relevant. Also, Thailand has done a very good job of controlling the virus, of looking, after Chinese tourists that were there when it started, and also of sending out the messages on WeChat and Weibo, social media, that they are, have things under control and that they really are supporting the Chinese travelers, and and basically showing solidarity, which is very important. We've also seen recently that New Zealand's social media in China has gone back to being active, as New Zealand declared that it's virus-free now. And they may be also one of the first kind of Western destinations to attract Chinese tourists.
I think that's because I think that's the big question for a lot of the European destinations as well. Is like, so when do we start marketing again? Because a lot of the destinations have had like a complete full stop of all their, especially long haul marketing activities, but also just generally marketing activities.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to get your perspective on like what to base a decision on when to start again, and also if you do a full stop for the next 6 months or even 12 months, how difficult will it be to then regain attention in the market, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. So in terms of what's the best thing to do, I would say maintain presence. It doesn't have to be at the same level. I mean, most of the destinations went down to maybe 1 post a week or a couple posts a month, but make sure that you are still active. Don't totally stop. If you totally stop, people will basically forget about you. They may just unfollow you. So you may be losing followers. Also, what was really successful on WeChat, for example, were posts that showed what was happening in their country, how are they kind of handling the pandemic and the crisis, and also showing, kind of sending messages of solidarity with China earlier on in the crisis. And now and some have never stopped, like Switzerland, for example, have kept going and maintaining the social media presence. I think that a lot of the posts that are quite popular and get a lot of engagement are the ones that are teaching people about their culture, about the food, about music, maybe not so much focusing on just tourism destinations and the scenery, but other aspects that people can learn about and enjoy reading, even if they know they can't go just yet. I think that's important. You don't just stay focused on tourism, but you can turn to other aspects of what you have, as a country and as a culture.
Well, for example, because you have a really nice blog post on your website on Switzerland and how they've continued to do marketing throughout. Is that something, and maybe this is too early to say, but is it something that you can see an effect of? Has it increased searches on Switzerland or demand for Switzerland? Can you actually see that?
Let me just share one post, which is a survey of the top destinations people want to visit this year, after basically after the virus is under control. So I'm going to share the screen now to show you that. So before the virus, the survey looked, as I mentioned before, put USA as #1, and then Japan, Thailand. And if you look at the left and all the countries there, and then you look on the right and the places people want to go after this is over, Thailand #1, and then Russia, again, a place that has a lot of open spaces and not so populated. Switzerland is there at #4. Now, I can't say exactly, for sure that it's because they kept maintaining their social media presence and actually kept active, but I do believe that it has a role to play. I mean, Switzerland has been doing excellent tourism for, probably 20 years or so. They were the first Western tourism board that opened in China. And so they understand the market, and they have a strong team there. Even though they don't have direct flights and they're landlocked, they've still been doing really well. And I think that image of Switzerland as a very natural place is helping. But I think that again, it would be helped by maintaining that presence.
It's quite markedly that they're not on the list pre-virus, and then they're quite high on the list, #4 on the list.
And similarly, Iceland, we know that Iceland put out very early on WeChat posts about how they're handling the crisis, and also I think their post was one of the ones that got a lot of attention and very, very significant high readership.
Okay.
And I think that's also relevant there.
Okay. I think that's so it does actually show that it could potentially influence at least awareness and consciousness of the potential of a destination, and then the images of less crowds, I guess.
Yeah.
So I had one interesting question from one of the knowledge group members as well, which was, as a destination who hasn't been very active in the Chinese market or haven't targeted China before the virus, do you think that starting to target China now, is it like a fresh start, and would that actually be a strategy you would advise in terms of recovery?
If there hasn't been any work done, I think that it probably makes sense to wait a little bit until the recovery starts. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily advise right away now to come out with big marketing campaigns, but it's still worth using this opportunity now, this time, to educate the travel trade.
Right.
So holding webinars, doing destination training, reaching out and engaging through online exhibitions, for example, is a way to start engaging and getting feedback from the travel trade. I mean, if you've never worked in that marketing in China, it's likely that the people in your team may not know as much about the Chinese market. And the best thing to do is talk with the travel trade, talk to people who are experts in this, and start developing products that would be suitable. It's also a great opportunity now to start learning what the market really wants, because it is changing, as we mentioned. So developing products and services that are going to suit what the Chinese are going to want, not what they wanted before.
Right.
And if you're not done it before, I mean, that's actually a good opportunity because you're starting from scratch. Then it's the open field, and you can build on it what you need to make that work. If you're there's already, for example, a big increase in interest in traveling to Eastern and Central Europe. This is like Montenegro and Croatia and Albania, etc. And that we've seen that, but I think that there's an opportunity now because, again, these are perceived as more kind of open nature countries with not so many people. And also, I don't think the crisis hit them as hard. So I think that capitalizing on it now and spending some money to get the message across that they're, when they're open for business, and the opportunities there to travel in nature and things like that would be really helpful.
And when we're getting to the end of this, but I'm curious to hear about transportation, for example, because we see a lot in the news about airlines going bankrupt, or at least decreasing their workforce quite dramatically and decreasing the number of routes. And so from a world that was hyper connected, we're probably going to come out of this with a world that is at least less well connected. How do you think that will influence? Like, will direct connections be a priority? I know it was as well before, but is it different now? Because, with the more you have to change flights, the more touch points you'll have, and perhaps the more you'll increase your, fear of the virus. And I don't know. And how are Chinese airlines actually doing?
Well, I mean, Chinese airlines continue to fly and are now flying again, at much increased capacity. They also have more government support than I would imagine, most Western airlines have. So I'm not worried about Chinese airlines' kind of survivability. It's definitely stands to reason that places that have direct flights will do better. People will try to minimize their exposure to other travelers, and I think Chinese airlines generally will do well to also offer now face masks, for example, and disposable gloves, and make a big deal of their kind of sanitation and hygiene standards, showing basically showing visible signs in the cabins that it's been sanitized before the flight, things like that. Right. It's important. I would say that in Europe for low-cost airlines, that's going to be a really important thing to do as well. And it's going to be probably more expensive. I don't think that right away we'll see the same number of flights because it depends on the demand as well. But it's going to take time to ramp up, and traveling in general will be more expensive. It also means that potentially it's the people who have the money that can start traveling faster, and the products that are going to be offered them need to match. Generally, we already see that Chinese travelers that were surveyed said they are going to look for higher category of hotels because they're also perceived as cleaner. There's more space there. People, they can still social distance in larger in the lobby and in the restaurants, which you cannot do in budget hotels. So there may be more of an increase in luxury and high-end services and products.
Well, in follow-up on that, like, how about home sharing? Because I know, for example, here in Copenhagen, there's been an increase in Chinese visitors also making use of Airbnb or similar services. Do you have any insights on, like, what's the demand on that?
We don't have specific kind of survey questions about that yet, but I do think that that's an important thing to survey in future, and I'll take that into account. My own gut feeling is that people will initially stay away from home sharing. Because of this issue of like not knowing what's the kind of standards there, and recognize brand names, especially hotel chains that have presence in China and can do the marketing really well there. They probably get more of the business initially.
Also, you see a lot of them coming out with like new standards and policies on hygiene measures and so on. So it's becoming part of the branding, I guess.
As well as the uncertainty of the future now means that offering fully refundable, flexible cancellation, stuff like that is important, and a lot of the kind of home sharing properties are not really offering that.
Right.
So that's another issue.
Yeah, true. All right. Well, I mean, our time is almost up, but is there anything that you feel we haven't explored that you want to add here in the end, right? Or a question that I should have asked?
Well, I just want to really urge people to learn for themselves about this market and understand how it's changing now really fast. So we have a lot of free resources on our website, on our blog, as you mentioned before, and we've just done an analysis of WeChat performance for the first quarter of 2020. And that analysis, I think, is really insightful to figure out what messaging really works in China, what type of posts and images and text and stuff engage highly with consumers. So I think that's worth a read. And we have recently held a webinar specifically for what hotels can do to cope with this crisis. That's available on for replay on our website. And we will have another webinar in May about digital platforms and how to use them in China. So, and again, it's free. It's going to be on the 20th of May, and details for that are also on our website.
That sounds really valuable, actually. So yeah, we'll include the links to the different to your website and perhaps specifically to some of the blogs that you mentioned when we post this video as well, so we can make it easy for people to explore what all the insights that you have. It's kind of also one of my key go-to places for insights on the Chinese tourism market. So I definitely recommend exploring there. All right, well, I think that's it for today. Roy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and answer all these questions. And as we talked about, you'll also answer the questions that I didn't get to ask in writing afterwards, and we'll put that in a blog on the A New Tomorrow subsite on ECM's website. So thanks a lot for joining us.
Fantastic. It was my pleasure.